in the largest amount of people or the things that are existing is going to be consciousness. I now can think, remember, process to get from point A to point B. That sounds very functional. And it sounds like the universe saying, evolve.
What does it mean to be human? Is it found in our breath, the beat of our hearts, or in the fleeting moments of joy and sorrow? We are fragile beings in a vast universe. What does it mean to be conscious, to wonder? We are explorers of our little world and of ourselves. In this series, we look into this internal exploration, questions with no right answers, only ideas of what it is like to be human, to express what can hardly be explained. We aim to send these explorations beyond our planet, into the furthest reaches of the galaxy. What will the finders of these messages make of our voices, of our questions? Will they see us as we see ourselves? Perhaps, too, they are searching, as we are, as humans.
There's a couple ways that you can answer this question. Like, you can speak about it from a biological perspective. You can speak about it from a spiritual perspective. You can speak about it from like a moral perspective. One of the books that both of you and I have been investigating, there's a situation in which humans were challenged with a particular scenario that caused them to act in an inhuman way, as it was defined. The reason why is that it didn't live up to some moral standard that we attribute to humans. So knowing that there's a moral side, obviously a biological side, and then you get to the spiritual side of there's some sort of, if you believe in a soul, of what that means, of how that connects to what a human is. For instance, if you think about if you were able to capture the essence of somebody and store it into a computer device and then stick it inside of, I don't know, anything else, is the essence of that human or is that not human? That comes down to the question of spirituality, of the soul not necessarily being there. So in each of these, I believe it has to be a specific set of criterion for, well, maybe not a specific set. It has to be some combination of spirituality, biological, and morality. And I believe what's interesting is that's going to change over time. Biologically, if humans exist 4, 5, 10,000 years into the future, especially if we go off into space travel, biologically, we will look different. Our brains will look different. Our bodies will look different. When we speak about science fiction novels, we talk about humanoids because they look similar from what we look like. If it were from a moral perspective, does humanity cease to exist if we choose to go down a darker path where morals look drastically different than they do today? I don't know. But I do believe that the level of morality or the range of morality for what he defines human will also change over time. So then that leaves the spiritual side. If both of these things can change to some degree over time, maybe not in drastic jumps, unless I'll get to that. Then the spiritual side is kind of like an on and off switch. That's the most black and white from a conceptual side. However, since we are least able to define that clearly, it becomes very difficult to sort out what that means from a spiritual side. That being said, I believe that the spirit of humanity, can persist indefinitely in many shapes and forms, biologically and not, and moral or not. If in a billion years from now humanity still seems to exist and we look nothing like we do today, think like nothing like we do today, exist in nothing like we do today, I still think it's fair to say that humanity exists, or humans exist, throughout all of its evolutionary periods. Now, there might be different categorizations of humans over time. Like we talk about Neanderthals. We would be the Neanderthals a billion years from now. So I still think that we would be still classified as human. And of course, like in the future, there'd be some future version of humanity that would look back at us and be like, that's so not human. We were so, we were playing with fire, like that respective version of fire. But I think the broader definition would still apply. The last thing I would say about what makes humans and the shifts that can occur are drastic changes in our environment. For instance, if there were a natural disaster, a meteor hits the earth, and all of what we know about society breaks down completely. I guess that's the other piece. I never really talked about the societal structures that exist from humans as well, since we are social creatures. We don't exist independently of one another. So I guess that's the fourth factor. Societal structures also, as they ebb and flow, will also exist in some way, shape, or form, and will be kind of contingent on the other factors I've kind of stated. So those are the four factors. Humanity can be defined as some combination of morality, spirituality, biological, and sociological interactions that, at least at this point, result into what we see in the mirror. A couple things. I think the first reaction is that I'm looking into the past. Ever since I was a kid and someone was like, what you're seeing happened billions of years ago. I'm like, yo, that's super cool. Because at a kid level, you think light is super fast. And then you realize when you think about the depth of space, it's super slow. So first, that I'm looking into the past. Second, I forget who the first person was to talk about Earth being the little blue dot in the vastness of space. But that is also a reminder of just how vast space is. Like when people go to like the Grand Canyon and they're like, oh my gosh, it's so big. Oh my gosh. Or they think about like how deep the Mariana Trench is in the ocean. You're like, oh my gosh, there's so much pressure down there. But then you think about just how vast even our own solar system is, let alone the galaxy, and let alone the infinite space that is beyond, and the dimensions that might be beyond, is dumbfounding. There was a study done the other day that they figured out that the solar system might actually be larger than they thought it was, even though that they've been studying and looking at it for quite some time, which is fascinating. So the vastness of it all, and the complementary point to this is just how significant what we have is. Because it is so vast, it is, in my personal opinion, unlikely that we will ever cross paths with another sentient being unless we figure out some sort of advanced travel. Which, as much as I would like to think that will happen, it's fairly unlikely. Maybe communication, but not human beings traveling. It reminds me of how special this little blue dot is. If we will never meet another group, we'll never meet another entity that thinks or processes or has anything resembling some sort of like cognitive abilities, every action that we do take on this planet becomes that much more significant. Even considering how many people are on the planet, how many resources that we have, how many wars are going on, how much are we destroying the environment? Are we going to be able to get to Mars in time before we just kill ourselves off? Are we going to be able to colonize the moon? Do we have enough resources to do so? Or is it just going to be based upon capitalism and money rules the world? When in actuality, to sustain humanity, it takes a lot more than just money. It's going to take something much grander than that. All those kind of things float through my mind when I look into space. I also, the little kid part of me though, also is like, man, I want to go explore all that stuff. just, I want to be able to, like, one of the most unique experiences in the universe would be like to be able to watch. I don't even know if would be able to watch the moment in which a star turns into a black hole. Like, it might take a super long time for that to happen, but I would love to see that. I would love to. Maybe that's the Star Trek part of my brain or the Star Wars part of my brain that's just like, we can float around anywhere and be perfectly safe and fine and see whatever we want without anything impacting us. Nothing like radiation or gravitational forces, time dilation. But I still want to float around in space and see what it's all like, as grand as it all is. Consciousness is fascinating because we like to think as humans that we are special in the fact that we have consciousness, the fact that we have this individualized perspective of the world and we exist in our own head, that we think that we're amazingly and infinitely unique in that space. And somehow we are special in that process of thinking and having a consciousness. I take a more pessimistic route. The closest thing that I can think of that's highly complex, that is self-contained and exists in its own beautiful system, is like a sun. So the reactions that are happening within a sun go on for a very long time, and they produce a lot of energy and a lot of heat. Bodies of mass orbit these entities, but it's just, if I were to reduce it down to what we know of physics and science, it seems very basic. We understand that gravity and fusion are happening to create the sun. Got it. And all the elements that are involved. To me, consciousness is not too far from that. If the universe is bound to evolve, and therefore the biological entities within the universe are bound to evolve, and these entities are bound to want to sustain themselves for as long as possible, maybe not as long as the sun, then they're going to find ways of making a system work over time. And the best way to keep a entity alive and persist over time seems to be consciousness, at least at our basic understanding of the universe. So the highest level of a biological being be able to persist as long as it can, as in the largest amount of people, or the things that are existing, is going to be consciousness. I now can think, remember, process to get from point A to point B. That sounds very functional. And it sounds like the universe saying, evolve. That being said, how consciousness actually works, that's a different question, because you said what is, not what, how does it work? But I will say that my hypothesis for how consciousness works is based upon, it's probably very close to many of the things that we're finding out on the quantum level. That what is actually happening is not physically inside of this thing. I think that is. We thought the Earth was flat, and we thought we could see it, and that's what it was. But I don't think that what is happening in the brain is all just happening there. Just like there's many factors that are impacting the universe that we still don't quite understand. So I think consciousness is an evolutionary process in the universe that allows biologicals to thrive for as long as they can in the best way that they can, because we're biologicals. And without a consciousness, I believe the persistence of whatever that entity is will inevitably be less than. Furthermore, I think consciousness is touching on the quantum side of things, and we just don't understand it quite yet. That's the best answer I can give you right now. Privilege to me is having the access and the opportunity and the ability to do something. And so if I think about privilege on a very grand scale, this goes back to the question of what do I look like? What do I see when I look at the stars? Is we are, as far as we're concerned, infinitely privileged of having the ability to have a consciousness and have a place to exist as humans, whatever that means. And we're privileged enough, and I'll get more to the definition in a moment. We're privileged enough to have two sides to this. We're privileged enough to have this individualized experience and look at the world, which comes with its own problems. And then we have this privileged experience of sharing this with the community from a group perspective, which comes with its own problems as well. And then we have the privilege of all of us thinking about all of us in the grand existence of the universe, which falls way shorter of the other two because it's too vast and too big for people to understand, I think. And we're too self-serving or wanting to serve the communities. That being said, what is privilege? Privilege is whatever we are granted with, or whatever we have. We could have earned it. We could have been born with it. We could be gifted it. It doesn't matter how you obtain it. What matters is that we have it, in my opinion. And if we only think about it on the individual, if we only think about it as like the benefit to me, if we only think about the benefit to the group that is right in front of me, we are missing out on something far greater. If I've come to the realization, this is my own personal thought, that the persistence of humankind has to be the forefront of our efforts, because otherwise our individual and group perspectives are going to override that and undermine the overall persistence of humanity. If our privilege and our abilities, our opportunities, our access is not committed to the long-term sustainability of humanity, then we are not using our privileges correctly. Now, that's a really big jump, because most people think of, I have the privilege of eating today. You have to be able to get to the end goal. You have the privilege of having a mother and father who are still alive. You have the privilege of being a kid who was forced into a war zone carrying a gun, and then having the privilege of being able to get out of that and having communities say, let's not do that. You have the privilege of going into outer space and seeing what the vastness actually feels. All of these privileges exist, but it doesn't, unless we tie them all together, unless we put them all on the table and we're looking at all of these aspects and we think about the longer term perspective about what humanity is, not the individual side, not the group side, even though you have to start there. If we don't look at the bigger picture, all these privileges don't mean squat, because they're not going to, I don't think, move us in the right direction. I'm highly influenced from a couple books that I've read about. Side note, I like to watch and read and listen to stories about apocalypse times, because it gives perspectives about how humans react when there's nothing that they can hold on to. And it gives me a glimpse into what we suspect will happen to us when we're faced with a bleak future. And in those moments, I'm secretly wanting and wishing for those that are left, those that are fighting for the scraps, those that are fighting for the little bit that is still available to us, to not kill each other off for the sake of killing each other off, not fight each other for the sake of fighting, not taking all the privileges that they have and using it just to squash everyone else, is to say, what is the equation that will end up for the persistence of humankind? Humanity overall. And that's not individualistic. That doesn't help the group necessarily, but that helps the group. And I think that's where all of our privileges should point to. You're making me actually like think about things that I've been playing around in my brain that I was like, well, and just making like a side comment in my brain. And so now I'm going back and I'm like, okay, well, actually, if you take all of these assumptions that I'm making about individual, or these thoughts that I'm making about the individual or the group or the community, then it becomes problematic no matter which direction you take it. And while I was just communicating about the fact of using the privileges for the greatest good, which is all of us, that's inherently, that's maybe, okay, let me start here. When it comes to the individual, I'm going to go back to a previous comment that I made about using our privileges to help humankind, and that should be our ultimate goal. The thing is that I'm not sure if we can get there without considering the individualized perspective, because if we don't pay attention to what is needed on a human level, an individual level to some extent, then we lose sight of kind of what, going back to your first question of what humanity actually is, because it does come down to not only the group, it comes down to the individual. So there is a piece of this equation. There's a piece of what humanity is the individual. And the individual portion of this is, since there's more pieces to it, is if humanity is a giant painting, the individual is the one pixel on the infinitely high definition image. And so you need the individual pixels to make the larger image complete. And so you can't discredit or discount the individual perspective. The reason why I was hesitating about answering this question is like, what is the value outside of that? What is the value of the individual perspective, and when does it become too much a focus on the individual? The way that we operate in society today, it seems as though if you were to take this metaphorical painting or picture, I guess it's a picture since it's a digital picture, since I said pixels, there are certain people that whose pixels are highlighted and other pixels are not. So you have like this weird, like hot heat map of what this image looks like. And this individualized perspective is one that I question. How far does the individualized perspective matter? I know that I enjoy kayaking. I know that I enjoy personally to play video games sometimes. I enjoy science fiction. I enjoy drinking coffee if I need to be productive. And I enjoy hosting and doing public speaking and making music. These are all the things that make me me, make me an individual, make me special, quote unquote special. And these are all things that contribute to the community. These are all things that contribute to, well, questionably to humankind overall. And my perception of the world also matters. So it's not only what I'm producing and giving out to the world, but my perception of the world influences all of those things. Which makes me believe that you can't have great contributions without emphasizing the ability of the individual to receive what's around them and interpret the world as they see fit. And so certain respect needs to be given to the individual so that that can happen, to further along humanity, to further along society, to further along individuals. I just think that there's a cautionary tale, though, of, I don't know if it's a tale, but I feel like there needs to be caution with how much and how often we emphasize the individual when considering the community and humanity. If it's not balanced to some degree, if it's not in some sort of equation that seems to be fitting, it can make the equation unbalanced. But the perception, the understanding, as a individual human, it is super important for you to be able to receive information and also to give information. Receive what is happening around you and give back to what's happening around you as an individual. I just think that it needs to be properly placed in the equation when you think about society and humanity overall. Go back. I just thought of a quote. I don't remember where I saw this or heard this. Oh, it was in a book called The Anatomy of Peace. And it was a side comment about the philosophy of I think, therefore I am. And the comment was, and I forgot about this aspect. It was like, it's a very popular phrase. However, how did you, the counter to I think, therefore I am is the definition of like consciousness and individualized perspectives is, well, how did you get to the conclusion that you thought that you were in the first place? You had to receive information from other people and you had to gather this from your understanding of what humanity is. So you think, therefore you are, or you am, is based upon other factors, and it doesn't come from yourself. You would not have come to that conclusion without external factors. So I just wanted to point that out as being something recent that I was like, oh, is there much that happens on the individual side that that you can simply say all originates internally from that one entity, that one person. And the only, because how you perceive, how you interpret either comes from biology or it comes from how society has taught you. It comes from nurture, it comes from nature. And so individuals could be argued are just a byproduct of both of those things. However, that does not reduce the value of their contributions or their perception of the world or the universe. It might, in fact, it does, in fact, within reason, improve it. That's where I want to end the individuals. Okay. I probably would have tried to tackle both because at its onset, I'm finding it difficult to think of community different from society. Because society is a group of communities and individuals working in existing in a space. Communities can be groups or individuals working in a space. I struggle with the difference between the two because it's just scale, in my opinion. Community, because if you think about, if I think about the way that I think about, let's just say, as for what I understand tribes to be back in the day, way back in the day when didn't exist cities, didn't exist anything, and we were only tribal. Well, that was both the community and the society that defined how people existed in that space, as far as I understand it. They were one and the same. And now we like to think about communities as being like, oh, the Black community or the academic community or the hiking community. It's like the subsets that exist within the society that are grouped by interest or some other thing that connects them. But that could also just be called a group. That's just a group of people. I guess so what's the difference, Jason? What's the difference between those and what separates them? As far as just having a group of folks who are interested in something or something that ties them all together. It has to be the way in which those things shape how one lives their life. If for a moment I use communities and / groups as a grouping of individuals that are focused on, let's do it this way. A group is defined as a number of people that are interested in the same thing or have something that a singular or two items that connect them in some sort of way. That's a group. I'm defining it on the fly as this. And they probably, in sociology, these are all properly defined in other ways, but just for the sake of this conversation. In a community, let's call this a group, it is a number of groups and individuals that operate to sustain themselves in some way, shape, or form. So there's a certain So I'm thinking of a community like in a small town. They're working together so that the farmers can provide food to the teachers and the teachers teach the kids and the kids are right. That's how I'm thinking about community. You can also the lines blur so easily. I'm just going to continue talking. I'm going to get to a conclusion, but this is just kind of the way that my brain's processing it. So the reason why I keep pausing is like, because if I think about this on a global scale, like if I think about the Jewish community or the Palestinian community, which is different than the Palestinian and the Jewish or Ukrainian or Russian society, the society. But a community could also be a hiking community, which is significantly different than a cultural based community. Because the level of history, but does it matter to the scale of history? How much does it matter to what level you identify with? When it comes to a community, it just matters that you identify with whatever that grouping is. But it's still just a group. But it's a grouping might be external. Is a grouping external? If I'm saying you're inside of this group or I'm inside of this group, I can say you're part of that group, and that's something that I can place upon you. I can't say you're part of a community. I can't do that. You have to tell me you're part of a community. I can say you're part of a grouping, though. You can say you're part of. Okay, so if grouping is a sense of you could lump any number of people in any particular way, that's called a grouping. There's no structure that exists. There's no societal implications. There's no ties. It's just a group of folks. Now, when you start saying, when you self-identify to a grouping that has, then that can become a community. And I recognize other people within that grouping that become, you're part of, I say I'm part of group A. You say you're part of group A. Okay, I recognize you as part of group A, and you recognize me as part of group A. That's a community now. It's this mutual understanding of mutual respect and understanding of participation within a group, and also self-acknowledgement within that group. That's the community. The society then, again, there's some lines that are blurred. Society then exists in the space where it's saying, not only how do these communities exist with each other, but how do these communities sustain themselves? How do these communities grow or stay oppressed? How do these communities interact from a financial level, whatever currency means, from a day-to-day level, from an educational level? Society is the way in which these communities interact with each other. Even if you think about society within the United States, these states, these cities, these subgroups all interact with each other, and there's a structure that we pretend to have, at least at that level. There's a structure that we cling on to as we move on up the chain. As we go from a group to community to society, we want structure. And when you think about it globally from a societal point of view, we still want structure, although it becomes really difficult at a certain level. It gets high enough up and then it becomes super difficult to implement structure. And then you have societies that are, then you could argue that these societies are now in conflict with one another. And there is not a global society. And those take the form of, in our current situation, nations. To a lesser extent, states in the United States, but like nations and countries. And you can even say, and ideologies are like a mixture between communities and societies where they kind of persist and exist across all forms of what I'm saying. I'm kind of talking in a circle, but I guess my point is the following. Communities are set of groups that recognize each other's participation within that grouping, and that elevates itself to a community. And when those communities come together to want to interact and persist, then that becomes a society. And the individual perspective is the present. The community, the social element is prevalent and exists in that space. And self-preservation exists, especially when you start talking on the societal side. And where those boundaries exist, where those boundaries exist, it really depends on the topic. I think that's where I'll leave it. I do agree that there's a certain level of agreement to a set of rules-ish, and there are power structures that exist within each of those items. So again, how you define a power structure within a society and the rules of a society versus a community and the structures that exist in the community, they're going to look different across the globe, and depending on what the topic is and depending who's involved, really, and kind of what the threats are to that group. Because I feel like the higher the threat, the more rules that might be in place. But maybe I'm wrong about that. Anyway, go ahead. What was your next question? Where's your next one? The way that I think the world defines truth today is something that is perceived by a large quantity of people and confirmed from a large quantity of people. That's how academics works. You do a particular piece of research and you make a claim, you do investigations, and then multiple people say, I confirm that this is also exist. I confirm this is also exists. And so therefore that becomes a truth. The theorems that we learn in school, the way that gravity persists, it is a combination of what we all perceive to be that happens in the universe. When we were thousands of years ago, before even hundreds of years ago, it was not a popular thought that the world was round because a bunch of people did not perceive it as such. There was not enough equipment, not enough agreement in the world that on Earth that the Earth was round from what they could tell. Okay, and then over time that was like, no, that became a flip. And it was like, no, the actual truth is that the Earth is indeed round. It's possible that in 100 years from now, somebody comes along and says, hey, we've been looking at space the entirely wrong way. The Earth is actually 8-dimensional, and it's actually in a whatever that geometrical shape is, right? And that becomes the truth. When somebody is but there's probably been plenty of times in which someone scientifically has seen something which actually happened and no one was able to confirm it. Does that make that perception any less true because other people could not confirm it? I don't think so. And so truth is a little blurred. Truth is blurred as well, but I do think because truth is blurred. However, I do think that truth does not need to be confirmed in the universal sense of, is it true or not? Because that goes into the whole idea of what is consciousness. That goes into a whole idea of like, what if somebody's like, hey, I saw what I thought is a ghost. I firmly believe I saw this thing move across the room. I was not on any drugs or anything. I was just completely sober, and I saw this thing move across the room. No one else can confirm it's not on any of the videos, but you saw that thing happen. I can't promise in the global universal sense of truth. I can't say that you were wrong or that did not happen. I can't say there might be a part of your brain that can see things. This one thing that I can't say that. But at the same time, there does need to be some in society, in communities. It's outside of one individual perspective, there needs to be some definition of what truth is. There needs to be some agreement, going back to the earlier conversation of what makes societies and communities. There has to be some agreement about what is and what is not. Otherwise, everything is just everything. And that's really hard to shape a community and a society around. The truths that exist in Russia are different than the ones that are in Ukraine. The truths that exist in Israel are going to be the truths that are different truths than the ones that exist in Palestine. The truths of those being oppressed are going to be different than the ones that are oppressing. A group of people have to agree to something for that to be true. And once that agreement happens, and if the critical mass has been reached, then it's a definition, and that exists and persists until until those truths unravel, because we've discovered something new. I think from a biological perspective, of a biological and evolutionary perspective, and also spirit, like any spiritual perspective, comes down to a couple, maybe even one key thing. And that's to contribute back to the whole. Ideally positively, but contribute back to the whole. From an evolutionary perspective, like why is one extra ant in an ant colony beneficial? Because it furthers along the ant colony. You can get more stuff done. Why does one more tree in a forest matter? Because it helps do all the processes in that ecosystem that allows that ecosystem to thrive. In every case, in the life of either one of those two things, ants want to have more ants, trees want to have more trees. They want to make sure that the ecosystem is thriving, and it continues to persist. Goes back to this ideal of persistence. If the meaning of life is for humanity, or for the meaning of life is for life to persist, and that sounds very cold. It sounds very this feels very like inhuman, if you will. But that's how the universe, from everything that I've at least been able to observe, that's what the universe wants. It wants to persist in as long and as strong as possible. A star will fight as long as it possibly can to exist before it either crumbles in on itself to become something new, or just dissipates into the rest of the universe. And if I don't know why suns are the thing that I gravitate towards, just because I don't know. But if evolution does exist, I don't see any other reason why than to help make sure the whole continues to go on. And my concern is like We need, my side comment to that is like, it's a reminder to myself of like, Jason, what are you contributing back to the whole? Also, how can I remind other people that that's why you're here in the first place? Yeah, sure. Go enjoy your movie that you want to today and go grab your Starbucks coffee. Yes, but, and what is your contribution back to the whole? That's it. Simple. My aspirations for humanity, in short, are for us to make enough technological strides and sociological strides where we can maintain a quality life on Earth and get to the stars, whatever that means. So that's the short answer. The long answer is, I think there are a number of there's some really, in my mind, simple shifts that would allow us to change our trajectory, our meaning humanity's trajectory, pretty significantly. And some of those relate to how we think about money, how we think about how we define what is important. And if we are able to shift the things that we claim are important, some think retribution is important. Some people think education is important. Some people think vacations are important. Some people think having a 401k is important. Some people have survival is important. I believe for us as humanity my hope is for us to be able to say, we are willing, we can come to an agreement about how to better the lives of many, the most amount of people, knowing that we have to make some sort of sacrifice to get there. I think there is a part of our persistence that will take a certain level of sacrifice, whatever that is, a foregoing of desires, a foregoing of certain concerns and needs. But there's an opportunity there for us to grow into something better, something more that serves the purpose of why we're here, is to allow us to retain all these elements of humanity that we've discussed while persist for as long as we can. And in our current iteration, I do not believe that that's possible. We think too much of the individual. We think too much of these things that we hold to be truths that are not. We hold too closely to things that I believe that we are capable of letting go. Yeah, you stab me in the eye, I'm not going to poke yours out too. Yes, you need to make sure your shareholders are okay, but that does not mean the detriment of all these millions of people as a result of that. The answer is, my hope is that we are able to break some of these rules that we've defined these truths to hold in humanity in order for us to persist long enough so that we can see what the actual stars look like.